My next guest in the Bravery Academy was the former Deputy Leader of the National Party in New Zealand. The Right Honourable Nikki Kaye joins me for a really honest conversation around both her health and her cancer diagnosis in 2016, her time in politics, and now, after getting out of politics, how this has reframed and reshaped the way that she looks after her own personal leadership. It is a truly inspiring conversation with lots of moments of awareness and reflection. Enjoy. Welcome along, Nikki, to the Bravery Academy. I'm so honoured to have you here and to have you share your story, both around your political career and what you've been doing recently.
Oh, it's lovely to be here, Emma, and I really admire what you have done and the stories that you're telling of people. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Tell me about where you are from and where do you live right now?
I was born in Auckland, so I sort of grew up in Auckland, but I lived in London, Dunedin, Wellington, and now I'm back in Auckland, although I should say that I spend quite a bit of time in the United States.
So sort of split lives between the two worlds right now?
Yeah, and I sort of do a bit of international consulting, so it's a bit more than the United States. So it is quite split, actually.
So can you take me back to your political journey? Why did you even want to go into politics in the first place?
Well, I mean, it sounds pretty cheesy, but I mean, I love helping people. And I got introduced to someone called Catherine Rich, who was a member of parliament at the time. And I kind of ended up getting elected. I walked into a meeting, women's vice chair for the Young Nationals. But basically, I really admired Catherine, and I could see the power at a very young age from a couple of experiences of what politics can do to help people.
They inspired you to go on this journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think that sort of direct line to making change. There's lots of hard things about the political world, but this capacity that you could be at the end of a decision-making process or near a decision-making process that will fundamentally change a whole lot of people's lives is a pretty awesome thing to be involved in.
And because you started at 28, that's a really big experience to be going in there. Well, not young politicians coming in there right now, which I go, how? Yes. I just did not have my head screwed on at that age. And I look at it even at 28, that would have been such a big moment of, was there imposter syndrome coming into that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I even got involved in the party, I think I was 19. So when I left politics at 40, I'd really had 20 years in politics, and then the National Party being my life. And then to be elected, I mean, I started campaigning at 27. And so when I was elected, I mean, no one expected me to win the seat because it had never been held before by the Nats. So of course, all of those thoughts of imposter syndrome, how the hell am I going to do this? I've got a seat which is like large amount of community organizations, business organizations, all of those things.
And did you win that seat?
Yes. Yeah. So I won it. I actually went on to win it and hold it 4 times. So wow. Yeah. So it's like, and because it was very much seen as, it was a left-wing seat for all of the time before I held it. Yeah.
And did you win against Jacinda Ardern twice as well? Did I read that right?
Yes. Yeah. But look, it was really close, to be fair, with Prime Minister Ardern. She was a very strong candidate. Yeah.
When you looked back at that time, what did success look like for you when you first started out in the National Party?
Multiple things. I mean, firstly, I was a very committed constituency MP. So, I mean, I knocked on thousands and thousands of doors, and those individual cases, people don't realise, but when you make a phone call or you write a letter and I still get people. I mean, I've had people cross the street because you change the course of their life with those individual cases. So I wanted to be a very committed, strong constituency MP, and I believe I delivered that. I think secondly, people often go back to their maiden speeches and compare their valedictories. And I mean, I was quite firm on the environment, and nearly lost my job when I stood up against mining on Great Barrier. But that's the greatest asset that we own as a nation alongside our people. And then I was always as well incredibly passionate about education and what that means in terms of equality of opportunity, what that means from an economic perspective. And so I think that I got runs on the board in those areas. And I think the other thing that I'd say that I never really realized when I went in there, but I think now I would say is probably hopefully a bit of the legacy, is I never really realized the eyes that were watching me. I know that sounds weird, but because I was so busy delivering, and at times we'll probably get to that, but just so busy and, stress and all these other things. When you're in a position of leadership, and I certainly realize this now, there's a lot of people watching you that you don't even know that are watching you. And so afterwards, I certainly realized that you end up sometimes more directly mentoring people, but then also afterwards, I hope that I've assisted to help bring some people through, both in the political process, but also just generally at leadership level.
I like that. The reflection that you've had post politics, right? There's going to be some of that time to go, what does it actually mean to me, and seeing the impact it's had.
Absolutely. I say to people, you don't get an exit interview in the political environment. One sits you down and goes, hey, this is what was good, this is what was bad. So you have to conduct I think the good ex-politicians conduct their own. And I certainly wanted to do that. I sought the counsel of a few people that I value very highly to be able to learn for the next sort of phase of the good and the bad. And there's definitely a few bad things in there that
There's always learning, right? Always learning along the way. And I think that's the element of owning up to like where we had our faults, but also the bits that we didn't know or have awareness around. So it's a big thing to come out of on the other side.
Yeah, I think that concept of growth, but also, I think quite a lot about trauma, and then also working environment, and where you best thrive, where you don't thrive. And I think some people get that with a bit of age. Yeah. And other people, get that from tough situations.
I think that trauma is a really big informer, right? So we don't always realize what somebody's hidden traumas are as well when we're working with them. And in the roles that you had, particularly, because you were managing the youth portfolio as well at one point?
Yes. Yeah. Quite varied, like ACC youth, associate immigration. Yeah. Civil defence in itself was like, in terms of responsibility, is to say to people, there's nothing quite like knowing that when you get a notification that there's been a large wave, and there's a chance there might be a large wave coming to New Zealand. I think there are a lot of people in leadership for which they put on a brave face, but there are times when that responsibility, the weight of that responsibility, it can be incredibly stressful.
So let's talk about stress and how that impacted you through your career. Did you thrive off stress though?
Firstly, like I geek out about this stuff quite a bit, so I'm telling you who is the expert on this, but when I think of the cancer world, I think like it's the number one, carcinogen, and I wish I could test my cortisol levels regularly, but I don't think I dealt well with stress at all. That's something that I've learned to, I think, deal a lot better with. And I think I didn't even have the awareness necessarily to know that certain situations that was stress playing out. And I certainly have far more awareness now, and then just actually like tools and techniques to manage that. And also just everything from a holistic perspective, that if you're sleeping well, if you're eating well, if you're, taking time for deep relaxation, if your relationships are good, all of these things can assist you in the management of stress.
What were you taught about stress growing up?
Zero.
Same.
Yeah. In terms of the personal stuff, my dad left pretty young, and mum, that was pretty difficult. She was working multiple jobs. And so this sort of sense of resilience, and that you will just stiff up a lip and you'll just kind of make everything work, was probably, it's probably a driver of being successful as well. Like, there were a whole lot of kind of benefits that came from that. But the acknowledgement or understanding of a different way of operating, and awareness of when you're in a highly stressful environment.
Well, how did that show up in your body back then?
You think about that. Well, I think sometimes anger.
Yeah.
Yeah. At times, and frustration, sort of like tense physically. So
muscles as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Neck, like tense. And I can't really believe now how unaware I was of that stuff.
that I can, because we're not taught about it. I
Yeah.
can. It's like
Yeah.
this is why my career as starting off as a physio has merged into this place of like, hey, we're actually not joining the dots here. We're missing this big, deeper conversation
Yeah.
around how do we communicate as humans and
Yes.
how do we self-regulate. We have a mental health crisis in our country for a reason,
Yes.
because we don't know how to express emotions safely, because they
Yes.
just build up and they become the iceberg. And so we just have the anger when there's so much understanding behind it. So no wonder you felt that way in those roles.
Yeah. And again, I know you'll be more of the expert on this, but I mean, I have different lenses. One is as kind of a former Minister of Education, I know all the science and the research in terms of not being able to regulate your emotions now, right?
Yep.
But at the same time, there is something in the real practical awareness of your own body and how you respond to different situations and what that means for you.
We're not all one size fits all, right? We all come with this level of luggage and baggage, which means one tool, one resource is not going to be enough to kind of be able to bring us into that calm state. It's around looking at it from a whole picture. We can slowly resource ourselves is one of the lessons that's come through for me. So it's going to figure out what are the things that help us to navigate stress and how does our body respond. It's a unique experience in that sense.
Yes.
Particularly with the way that we think as well. The thoughts that have come in from our upbringing, like you said, around you were taught that success was survival and getting ahead was a way that you were able to be, safe.
Yeah, I think certainly that there's the psychological history of what was kind of ingrained in you. And I've seen someone I've had she's sort of part therapist, part many things for over 6 years. And the best analogy that I can make in my life is my running. Like I used to run and I used to think a lot about that. I used to think about the timing of it, the different races, all of these different things, and awareness, a huge awareness of my body physically. And so that's the best way that I can describe it to my friends and other people when I'm sort of an advocate for therapy. I think it's about taking the time and the care to understand how you're feeling, your emotions, your baggage, all of that stuff.
So how did it feel when you actually left Parliament?
Well, it was a very tough exit because Todd had a mental health very significant event. And so it was heartbreaking because one, I was feeling a lot of emotions for him, and the nature of the environment is people didn't really understand that. I mean, we had to sort of manage his privacy, but then also this sort of sense of blame and, on the eve of an election, I had given 20 years to the party and then to sort of be going out in that way. So it was tough at that level, that sort of sense of loss. But at the same time, it was absolutely right for me. I mean, because of my health, I had a very different lens, which was, and I said this afterwards, I was able to be there when I was needed, but when I wasn't needed, the calculation of my life because of my health challenges really changed. So it was part horrific and incredibly devastating, but then part incredibly liberating. So a sort of very mixed bag.
Taking the identity off of that role you'd been for so long, was there fear moving out of that?
Yeah, so many different things. I think anyone that leaves, you've got lots of different things happening. One is your identity. A lot of people's self-worth has been tied up with that identity. And while I don't think there's a large gap between, people saw who I was, I say to people, it's a bit like being frozen in time because, you see, I've lived 10 lives since I left 3 years ago. But everywhere I go, most people see you as that public figure. I think a lot of people grapple with the change in identity, this sort of sense of workload and other things that sort of change. And then you've got this freedom. And then, you're recalibrating your relationships as well because people are not used to having time and what that looks like. And yeah, it's certainly been very challenging at times, incredible as well.
They're very much the right decision, listening to your gut to make that choice.
Yes.
And what about the media then, the scrutiny and that process for when you were both in politics and then when you left? How did you deal with that pressure?
So, I have said to a lot of people, I personally had very few situations where I really felt that they were out of order. So I could count on my hands a number of times. I didn't like what they said. I didn't like the way they might have hounded me, but I understood that was part of a pretty high functioning democracy. I think there has been some changes though that are not that positive. It's not about individual media. It's about this sort of model probably where I think that there are elements for which we haven't got the in-depth nature of some public policy, which I think is not good. The moments that I had very bad media experiences were probably more about them crossing a line in the personal stuff. And that was tied up with, a very public situation with a family member in prison in the US. And so it was the lines that they crossed in that situation.
Well, it still means there's an impact on you though, right? From being in that role. Again, there's a layer of stress and emotional stress from that experience. What was it like then for a woman being in that leadership role? Was there challenges in that?
Absolutely. I mean, and I think things have changed quite a lot. And I would say, the experience that Ruth Richardson and Jenny Shipley and Helen Clark experienced, I certainly might have experienced 5% of what they went through. But sexism, I mean, I've got a book full of stories if I wanted to of just absolute sexism, and not in the political environment, but also within the business communities that I moved and the public. I think, as I say, I think some of that has changed, but there's still more to do.
It's a bigger picture of like, there's a lot of work to be done, but there's been a lot of work done.
Yeah. I mean, I think being a younger woman as well, like at that particular point, there were two elements going on there. But look, I mean, it's not just about sexism. I mean, there's racism. And I know a number of other people who are former colleagues who are currently in the building who have experienced some pretty extraordinary stuff.
Is there support for politicians that are going through that? Like, is there support as you navigate that? Who's mentoring you?
Well, I think that, there has been the Debbie Francis review, which has really focused on the whole environment. And so I think the answer is, I mean, I sort of created my own network of people, and certainly I had one or two people I consider were mentors. But I think that review has been focused on making sure that the environment is better.
So the big piece that made you leave politics, was it your diagnosis in 2016?
It wasn't just that. I mean, I think there is a chance if I hadn't had the diagnosis that I would have continued and made the decision to stick around for the next national government. But because of my diagnosis, that I just couldn't commit to that. I think there is a chance, though, even without the diagnosis, I sort of have a strong view. There are some people that are lifers. Yeah. I sort of have a view, which is if you're in there and you are taking up a place and there are other people coming through, and I remember saying this to my friends and family, that if I ever get grumpy or resentful or anything like that, you slit my throat, you tell me, get out of there, because it's a privilege to be in there. And I was tired. I was burnt out. Obviously after everything had occurred, I think certainly if we'd continued on, I may have stayed for a while. And so I think there were other things occurring just in terms of where my life was at.
Can you tell me a bit more around people that don't know what the diagnosis was in 2016 for you? What happened?
Yeah, so I was 36 and diagnosed with breast cancer. I never really talked about the detail of that, but John Keir, I tried to resign and he put me on leave while I had some surgery and other treatment. And I've always just kind of said my health isn't perfect. And this is ongoing for me, but I just try and have some privacy about that. The wonderful thing about illness is that, not everybody has this experience. Some people get angry and sad. And I certainly have been angry and sad at times, but I truly believe when I leave this world, I will have used most moments pretty well. Like, it provides a constant reminder to just be intentional in terms of relationships and friendships and say things that other people might wait or think they have time to say. And certainly, I sort of think I lived my life a bit like that anyway, but there are gifts that come from illness.
Yeah. And that takes a lot of self-reflection to even get to that point, right? Like you said, you've done work in the last 6 years with therapists and people to actually help you understand this. Can I ask you what the biggest lessons have been from a health perspective of what you've been able to learn to take control, have helped you?
Oh, look, I mean, I don't know if this is the right term, but I was kind of ground zero in that I ate poorly. I had trouble sleeping at times. I probably drank at times of my life a bit much, and then, didn't deal with stress well. So all of it, I mean, I have radically changed my diet. I very rarely drink alcohol, and when I do, it probably doesn't take much for me to.
No.
I mean, Jesus. So it's pretty rare I drink alcohol, and I'm very focused on good sleep. I still find stress, I still think my management of that will be ongoing, and that's tied to a few other things in terms of trauma and all of that. That will be the work that will be ongoing for my life, I think. And yeah, I mean, I'm super focused on both physical and mental health. And a bit of that, I mean, I'm not religious, but I consider myself a bit spiritual.
Have your values changed since you were in politics and before cancer to now?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting one. I think they haven't dramatically, my values, but the way that I practice those values and the honesty for which, how I show up and live them, I think I'm a bit better. And no one's perfect, all of those things. But I think I've always been quite firm and had a very clear picture. And maybe you could say like 85% of it, like I've always had a very high bar, I think, in terms of integrity, but I certainly didn't manage stress that well, basically.
How do you deal with that emotionally now?
There's lots of different sort of techniques and things that I've learned, and I've just unpacked a whole lot of stuff and hopefully released a fair amount of things, and tried to rewire my antennae to know more when I'm in that situation, and then to be able to kind of breathe and try and operate differently. I know I can get triggered by certain things, and I know that I've always found it really hard to say no, which is hence why I became a workaholic. And so I'm really proud of myself. I've turned down a lot of stuff since I left politics, and I still do an amount of kind of community contribution very behind the scenes, but I'm very aware of not overcommitting. I'm very aware of trying not to become a workaholic, but it's a constant. I think a lot about impact and what are kind of good intentions, and more strategically about who I want to help. And I'm certainly in this phase where I've kind of been testing things like, if you're an ex-politician, can you really do X? Because you can't overpromise to people, because some people think, oh, you're an ex-politician, so you can just make this happen.
Yeah.
And certainly there are times where you still can, but being careful not to get sort of wound back into the old world. I've been really clear with people. Like, I will always be a former deputy leader of the National Party, but because I'm working in the areas of kind of education and the environment, I don't want to be as sort of partisan. And so that sort of balance of how you navigate that as well. It's been a transition to both the workload, your sort of new identity, and the skills that come with that, whereas some people still always see you as a politician. So yeah, that's how I look at it.
And that's been a 3-year journey, right, since you've left politics.
And I took a really decent break, and I certainly have, I'm going from 100-hour weeks to completely different.
How do you rest and recover now?
I have a piece of land on Great Barrier Island, which I've got some pods next to it, and I'm hoping to have them on the land. It's been a long time in terms of consent. So Barrier is a place where I rest and relax. I've spent a bit of time in Hawaii, actually. And so I love the hot weather and I love exercising. So those two things. And then at the general practice, like in terms of
Day to day.
one, I didn't realize how much routine can be quite important. So I think I've focused a lot more on daily routine and exercise, good food, building in those people that I really care about, particularly those kind of close mates. I've got this really cool WhatsApp group, a couple of my friends. Yeah, it's sort of a daily practice. And I say to people, being really intentional about deep relaxation and joy and health. I equated relaxation before 2016 to a holiday. Yeah, it's pretty much, like work like a dog, 100-hour weeks, and then you'll get a holiday and then everything will be fine. And so I think probably the big shift is that awareness of both physical and mind practice and kind of self-care as a daily routine.
Your honesty is really important, Nikki, with this. I think there's so many women and men that will be listening to this going, oh, either I'm in that mode or I've walked that path and I just don't know how to move out of it. Like that's just the constantness. And so when you get those warning signs, it doesn't have to be a big handbrake moment, health crisis that you've had, and I've had moments of that in my life as well, which have gone, okay, this is not good enough. What's happening? You've got to change. You've got to reshape it. And it's often they're like, I just need to get to this moment. I need to get to this moment. Then I'm going to be okay. Just going to get this done. And then I can stop and rest. And it's the key thing here is the rest has to be, and the rejuvenation is we've got to keep charging that battery as we go. And that listening in to say no, I'm really grateful for you sort of sharing that piece, because I think so many of us, particularly as women, there's a lot of research around that and around illness and health that can be really challenging for us, and even to express our emotions. Have you read much around Dr. Gabor Mate's work on your health journey?
I have not, but I will.
Yeah, I think you love him.
I think, I've had a lot of reflections post my illness and the work that I've done, and then leaving politics, around those people who are frontline in caring professions. And it's complex because I don't want to generalize here, but I think that I see a lot of people now that I just think are burnt out and they are overwhelmed. They are used to being strong at whether it's education or health professions in particular, but they are layered with trauma and dealing with a lot of different things. I think the other thing that I have had multiple conversations actually with people who have been pretty open and honest when they've sort of fallen over and they've wanted to kind of chat about understanding what's driving being a workaholic, or what's driving not being able to say no or whatever. And I don't want to generalize. I can only really, talk about myself. And, I thought I was a pretty strong and confident person, but clearly the bit of insecurity that lay underneath that of what happens if I say no, and where that all came from. Like, a life of worth is to be completely burnt out and look after everybody else, but not yourself.
Exactly. That's why I asked you at the start what success was then. And now, what do you see success is?
Yeah, I think quality relationships, particularly as well, like my nieces and nephews, although I've still got more and more work to do. I think I still want to make impact. Happy is part of it, but live a peaceful life, which is quite different in that I think that you can be delivering at a very high level and you can be at peace. And that is the greatest thing that I've experienced as well, kind of with all the work that I've done, is to be much more at peace with both who I am, what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And that sense of there's lots of things I can't control, but that I'll be more at peace.
Love that, Nikki. That's such strong self-inquiry and leadership, that self-leadership, because you're doing leadership in so many other areas of your work and your career. But the self and personal leadership is, again, something that I think we're still only really uncovering in both workplaces and, like I said, governments, communities around, well, what does it look like to actually put my oxygen mask on and actually realize how that impacts everybody else around us. You can't have those relationships being successful and peaceful if I'm not doing that time and reflection. So I really love that honesty again from you, and that reflection. It makes it so much easier for us to go, oh, okay, someone else has walked this path.
Thank you.
What about now then? What would you say to other men and women that are walking your path?
Well, so a few things. The first thing I'd say is stop.
The stop.
Yeah. And if you can, and are strong enough, ask for help and ask for an honest view of how people see you and what you're doing. That can be quite a painful process. I think the basics, which I know you're all over, and obviously for me it was all just this new school of nutrition and sleep and all of these things, because your capacity to cope or change or manage that, what might be a pretty significant transition with your family and work and all those things, is going to be 100 times easier if you are eating well, sleeping, probably, physical movement. And then I think if you can, but I know that this is probably a bloody, for some people this is not possible, but if you can get access to someone at the therapy level, if you know that you've got unresolved trauma or other things, that actually that's a really brave and strong thing to do, to seek help in terms of therapy. A lot of people see that as weakness because they've been told or trained that's weakness. But get your head in a space that a strong person seeks help to resolve unresolved trauma.
I love that. There's some amazing people that I've been speaking to on this podcast. And one of the things that a recent guest said was, and it sticks with me, is that there's no shame in being a victim or being through these experiences and through trauma. There is no shame in that. These are things that have happened to us, as what happened to you, but actually how we step through it is really the magic and the space for growth. And that is painful and challenging to do, like you said, to ask for help. But if all of us can do it, I've done it many times in my life and go, this doesn't feel right. I don't have the roadmap.
One of the biggest things that my person, she taught me, was around healthy relationships. And I think that capacity to understand that actually you don't have to have particular friendships, and it's much harder with family, but you can choose not to have relationships that are not healthy. And when people think of that, they just sort of think of the most extreme view of that. But actually, if someone's chipping away or knows how to push your buttons or whatever, then learning to be able to speak up for yourself, or to be able to redefine that relationship, or to be able to end that relationship.
Again, an awareness about our need to people please sometimes. And that actually, once you go, this isn't serving me, you can see how much it is doing a constant drip of stress chemicals, because our other humans are the biggest reasons why we are triggered. So if we're not got the relationships that serve us, of course we're going to keep, being stuck in that hypervigilance mode or stress, and the resilience isn't going to be there. So I think it's a really beautiful insight for people to see. It's not just about getting the sleep, getting the food, and move the body. Really, it's like 5 veggies a day. We're past that. We've now got to think about who are we, who's in our world, and how are we communicating, and how are we being kind to others. One last question. What does bravery mean to you?
It means the courage to be honest with yourself and those people that you love about your ikigai, which is kind of life purpose, and to be able to live in a way that means that you can deliver on that life purpose. You live in a way that is incredibly intentional and good and focused on that. The other sort of comment that I would make is it's taken a long time for me to realize that to be brave in terms of love requires vulnerability.
Thank you for tuning in to the Bravery Academy. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And if you're looking to take your support for the podcast to the next level, visit patreon.com/The Bravery Academy to access exclusive content and get early access to our upcoming episodes. Your feedback means the world to us. So please take a moment to give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Thank you for being part of the Bravery Academy community. Stay brave, stay curious, and keep challenging yourself to grow. Until next time.